Hi, I'm Soren Bjornstad. I work on RemNote right here and all other kinds of stuff related to spaced repetition, flashcards, and note taking and organization and that kind of stuff. Today, what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about reviewing in spaced repetition apps and show you kind of how that works for me, because I found that I talk a lot about creating good flashcards and about all kinds of skills related to organizing and learning. But for the most part, we tend to, for whatever reason, assume that like, oh, you know how to review flashcards. There's not really anything to it. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's actually a lot of skills involved in reviewing carefully. One reason maybe that people don't demonstrate this very much is that most people have some pretty private content in their knowledge base. However, RemNote has this really nice feature where you can hide or reveal super private rem. So I've done a little bit of work to mark stuff that's private in my knowledge base as private, so that you can specify when you're studying flashcards whether you want to actually show those or not. So hopefully nothing really scary will come up. If it does, I may need to do a little bit of editing, but that's no big deal. So I'm just going to go through my review queue and try to verbalize out loud what I'm thinking and how that works, and if there are other actions that we need to take, I'll talk about those as we go along. I've got my cup of tea here. This is an important part of the review process, and I'm only half joking. It's helpful if you're doing a lot of reviews to kind of make yourself comfortable. Sit down, try to find a time when you can focus and you're not going to be interrupted right away. And so I always think it's helpful to have, some calm music that's not going to distract you, or a hot drink, or sit, if you have a mobile device that you can study on, sit down on the couch with a blanket or whatever makes you feel relaxed and ready to just focus on what you're thinking about for a little while. So without further ado, let's get started. This is a lab that we have on in RemNote right now. It's not perfect yet. There's some glitches, well, not exactly glitches, just design issues with it, which I'll probably gripe about at some point, but it is kind of nice because I find it's easier to maintain your attention if you're focusing on topics that seem interesting at the moment, and this kind of gives you a chance to control your own review process by presenting a couple of things you might start with. And let's go ahead and start with stuff that I recently added about St. Paul here. So this is a neighborhood in St. Paul. The answer here for this close is St. Paul. This is a neighborhood that I live in Minneapolis, and I think it's quite similar. That was easy. So this is probably not a very good card because it's just listing like 4 similarities. In fact, I have no good idea how to do this, so I'm just going to mark this as edit later, and I'm going to say too long, and we'll look at it again later and try to improve it. This is named after the Cathedral of St. Paul. There's a Selby Avenue streetcar tunnel, which has since been filled in. These I recently added, so often if I added cards myself, I find that I find myself answering easy on them almost every time, unless I've forgotten them, or they were really bad cards like the one that I just put in edit later. And this is if you go to the south side of the cathedral along Summit Avenue, there's like a staircase down. There's no grocery store. I suggested driving down Summit Avenue, which is what I did the other day. There's a lot of interesting houses there. I'm going to skip the private rem for now, as discussed. LA is the densest urban area in the US, very strangely. Oops. Okay, so I accidentally clicked that because those private rem came up. And so I'm going to click skip, which will bring it back in an hour without providing any scheduling information, because otherwise it's pretty hard to answer this. This is 50 South 6th, I believe. Okay, that was definitely hard. This is we gotta zoom into this. This one's Downtown East neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. The popular internet millennial persona never has any slack, and so is forced to make suboptimal decisions or life choices all the time. The water slows down as it approaches a dam because it's being held back, which means that it can't hold as much silt and it falls out of suspension. So this is when you have a section of highway that goes over to the other side of the divided highway in order for construction to reroute people. This is a humorous concept where as soon as the seller of the product can no longer see the taillights of the purchaser's vehicle, the warranty expires. This is my neighbor's dog, Nellie. That should probably be private, but hardly anything secret in there. Is so damn hard, he says. Author of this topic is Sasha Chapin, and his thing on making good normal conversations better. This is a concept by some libertarian think tank where a public official uses some kind of vague threat of a policy change or something to compel a private actor to do something. This is a thin market. Whoever wrote this called this the happily ever after fallacy. So the effect of this blanching method here is that the peas slightly soften, but they don't actually end up cooked. Mostly just there's still a little bit of crunch to them, but they don't taste raw. This is also maybe a not so great multi-line flashcard because I know I just keep seeing this over and over again. In fact, I'm gonna do the same thing here. I forgot to click edit to give it a message, but we'll know what it is. Cardinal orientation of the streets downtown. So in Minneapolis, you have your standard north-south, but then next to the Mississippi River, it tilts like this. It's actually backwards of that on the video. So they end up being northwest to southeast. Cause of this effect, well, I gotta remember what the effect is first. The effect is that congestion kind of works in reverse in public transit, so that the more people use a route, the more convenient and faster it is. And the cause is that when you have more people, you're able to have higher frequency on that route, and so you end up waiting less time to get on the bus or train, and so as a result, you get to your destination faster on average. 777 is the standard way to say that. Okay, this is a new table flashcard here. I'm studying Christopher Alexander and co-authors Patterns of Architecture classic. This really should be up here, and we're currently working on changing that. Possibly by the time you see this video, it will even not work this way, but this is an extra front field here. So we're trying to say, what is the problem being solved by this pattern? As you can see, it's kind of awkwardly out of order in the current design. But the solution here is to, instead of having a bedroom, have a dressing room or a playroom or something like that, and then have a small alcove off of it with a curtain or a door or something, and put just the bed in there. So his current approach here is working one-on-one with motivated learners and trying to find information there. You should not guess when trying to swap out a new habit. Okay, here. Early in RemNote's history, there was a bug where every time you made a close deletion, there were extra spaces added to the front and back, so I try to clean those up when I see them. You put it in curly braces. Oops. Curly braces. That was very easy. I just hit back to go back and rewrite that because I selected a rating which was unnecessarily difficult. This is named after the German terrorist group in the 80s and 90s. Oh, okay. See, okay, here's a good thing to talk about. I interpreted this named after descriptor as meaning the name, where did this come from? But what this question is actually trying to ask is why is the phenomenon called this? Not like who is it named after, but what's the origin story of the name? And so I answered this incorrectly. So we'll fix that later. This is called decide. So the Nobel Prize effect says that a lot of people, after they win a Nobel Prize, never do any important work again. Psychological causes you don't feel like you can work on anything small, and really you need small problems to work on in order to come at big ones effectively. You can't usually start by trying to solve a big problem. that was like 2 other flashcards that I included in that explanation. Normally I wouldn't be quite as detailed if I were just doing it in my head. So this is an interesting type of card here where I have talked about how, like, my experiences on this trip. And I tried asking ChatGPT to make some cards for me for my journal entry about it, and it didn't go as well as I kind of hoped. I found that its phrasing of questions was just absolutely dreadful. They did not make good flashcard prompts. I wish it would skip all of those in a row. Could probably work on that. 2 dangers of remaining near the bottom of an evacuation slide. One is that other people crash into you and hurt you, and the other is that when a bunch of people are sitting on the bottom, the slide ends up being steeper, and so it becomes more dangerous for everybody coming down. Solution, the photoelectric effect happens because of photons, which behave like particles and are able to like release stuff from material from the surface of a substance. Ingredients in this quiche. I believe there are 8 eggs in the proportions here. We've got extra spaces here again. This is a fun trivia fact. Punch cards were sized to fit in standard currency drawers so that you wouldn't have to make any special devices or trays to hold them. This is 7th Street, what would be 7th Street in the order of streets in downtown Minneapolis is Avenue, not street. But yes. Odd numbers in the interstate highway system run north-south, and they increase from west-east with the lowest numbers on the west. Even numbers go from south to north. So if both people in participating in conversation tend to have a stronger giving or a stronger taking philosophy, and they're the same, usually conversations are easy. If they're different, if nobody makes any attempt to adjust for it, the conversation can be awkward. Polar bear liver, very dangerous to consume because it contains a ridiculous amount of vitamin A. Okay, when k is less than n is less than infinity, do people try to like de-escalate without hiding from the disagreement? Useful default phrase, something like I've been talking a lot. Wow, I've been talking a lot. What do you think? Is that? Yeah, okay. I thought these were straight quotes. That's another thing that I try to fix as I go along. This was 2005. Yeah, partially recalled because I kind of had trouble identifying that for sure. Every party is a Facebook party, even if Facebook isn't involved at all. It's a funny thing. I actually knew this exact wording, but I rephrased it in my own words, even though it was actually looking for the exact text. So that's why I said good, even though I said different words than were actually in the quote. Fun fact, Haber was uniquely positioned to invent this process because he happened to work at a light bulb manufacturer which had almost the world's entire stock of pure osmium at the time. So the goal here, if you're not familiar with this, Target tried to target newly pregnant women, and they ended up sending advertising to people before many of them actually knew they were pregnant. They were so good at it. And they did this because they were hoping to convince people to shop at Target for things that they previously might not have, because when people go through major life changes, like their habits are unusually fluid, and it's a good time to try to convince people to change. For all mortals. Good profile. Dating profile should not present like a aspirational version of yourself, different from what you actually are. So it's weird to need to promote that you were at a Facebook party because Facebook parties were at the time open to anyone who was on the site anyway. So Grelling-Nelson paradox is if you have the words autological and heterological, is the word heterological. This is the same thing as like what's the Russell's paradox one, where you ask if the set of all sets that don't contain themselves contains itself. But this is more troublesome because you can't adjust the definition of a set in order to get out of the paradox. Because if you say, oh, you can't use, if you try to redefine the word heterological, somebody can just make up another word that they say means the same thing. Language can't be formally defined in the same way. Because otherwise it's, your relationship is not respectful. I'm not sure about this. Okay, that card just like didn't feel good. I wasn't able to clearly identify exactly what it was asking. I like had some vague conceptual notion of the idea space around it, but didn't have a good way to answer the card. And it didn't feel like it was reinforcing anything specific in my memory. It was just kind of like making me think vaguely in an area. So it doesn't feel like, as it was a high value card that was actually helping me to remember something specific that I wanted to know, or even revisit a specific idea. It was a very vague, like all the space of what makes a good relationship all together, which isn't really a useful card, I don't think. Because I think about that all the time anyway, without having to study a flashcard for it. In PowerShell core, enumeration type, how to get the name associated with a value. This is called get enum name. Yeah, there's a get enum names and a get enum name method. So it'll be media types.get enum name. 15, obviously. This is just media types : OGG. I believe they were 95% successful, 90% successful. I'm going to say that number is close enough. I'm going to say partially recalled. That's kind of a judgment call that you often have to make on numbers. You know, I don't think I would feel like I had vastly screwed up if I relied on that number being 95 versus 90%. It's just kind of a useful statistic to understand that, well, they're way more unreasonably effective than you could have expected. Perspective to consider yourself in. This is like from an outsider's perspective. If somebody else was looking at your conversation, would they perceive you to have the goal that you believe you do at that time? This is called the hard easy effect. The two effects of checking your goal, as we just talked about, are that you first of all, just the act of checking like helps to stabilize you and make you think a little bit more logically about the situation if your emotions are running too high. And secondly, you might realize that you're arguing in the wrong direction and that what you're doing is not actually helping you to accomplish your goal. So that's return to your original purpose and calm your body. The two principles here, I hate this card, and I was looking at it earlier, and I'm going to remove this from here. That's my edit later reason. I'll think about what's wrong with it later. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you can know exactly what's wrong with the card and write that down, or even just fix it, you know, if it's a typo or something. But sometimes it requires a little bit more thought to understand what's wrong with it, and I don't like doing that while I'm reviewing. It takes me out of flow, so this is why the edit later flow is fantastic, I think. System 1 can't produce complex ideas through like a conscious, orderly series of steps. That's called a datum? Yes, partially recalled, difficult. 50%, I want to say. 50%, yes. Also slightly difficult. Numbers tend to be slightly difficult until, at least until your algorithm brings the ease down to the right level by hitting hard repeatedly. When you mix water and powdered limestone to form cement, the calcium carbonate, which is the chemical makeup of limestone along with trace elements, turns into calcium hydroxide, which is highly reactive and will eventually be able to set back into calcium carbonate once it's been poured and shaped. That can 24 hours or 1.5 months. This is because the card was failed at some earlier point. or actually it's because it was held in edit later for a while because I just fixed this card this morning. Feels more like 24 hours than 1.5 months, so we'll go with that. Data type for an executable snippet of code that is called a syntax object. It's the datum plus its context here in Lisp, or in Racket specifically. Irreflexivity is the claim that no truth can explain itself mathematically. Domino that triggered the event in an event object is the target property of that object. Most people are much more likely to underestimate outlier. Well, is that true? No, I bet they're more likely to overestimate. Yeah, they're more likely to overestimate the outlierhood of something they currently have and underestimate how good an outcome can be obtained. That was hard. Had to think about that. Moment respect disappears. Conversation's not about the actual content of the conversation, but about that lack of respect. Aliasing exported members. Syntax for doing that is you say import thingamabob braces, or sorry, exported members. Export whatever object as whatever you want to alias it as. There we go. By the way, I'm using the mouse for this just so that I can point at things while I'm talking. Normally I would be using the keyboard shortcuts, or usually I actually review on mobile because I find it's easier to tap things like this than to hold my hand over the keyboard. I find that quite uncomfortable to hold my hand over the keyboard while I'm just sitting there. So usually review on mobile. If I am reviewing on desktop, I normally don't use the mouse because it's a lot of click and move, but it's very natural to be able to point to things while I'm talking. Visible Gorilla Experiment is a really fun experiment where you ask people to count the number of passes of a basketball between some people on a court, and then a gorilla runs by, or a man in a gorilla suit runs by, and a lot of people don't notice the gorilla at all. When you are using a cordless drill to screw things in, if the screw is is wider or longer, it's going to require more torque to get it in, so you probably want to start with the clutch setting a little bit higher. This is called a promise executor. Yeah, difficult because I had to because if you find yourself with your voice going up at the end, it's probably a partially recalled. Joining elements into a string, that is the join method on an array. Purpose of satisfies, it's kind of like as, which is a type conversion, except if it does not naturally actually change to that type, it will throw an error instead of coercing it to that type. So the purpose is to essentially make assertions about what type something should be without changing the type later in TypeScript's consideration. FFT went unknown after it was initially discovered for a long time because Fourier, who discovered it, was it? No, it was actually Gauss, I think. Was it? Well, in any case, whoever it was, that's not actually part of this flashcard, didn't recognize the significance of it, and so he didn't publish it. But then eventually it was published, but it was written in non-standard notation in Latin, just as part of his notes, and so nobody happened to see it there. Yeah, it was Gauss. Okay. Masking in a conversation which is not going well is when you try to understate your actual opinion because you're scared to state your full opinion. Controlling, when you try to prevent the other person from speaking in a conversation somehow, or overrule them. I selected, should I have selected hard there? I don't know. I selected hard because it didn't match the wording here, but I think I got the concept, so that's probably actually good. Interesting. People often talk about how it's challenging to rate things effectively when you start reviewing, but I've been doing this for, this is my 14th year of doing this, and I still sometimes am not sure what rating to select. I've just gotten very used to being not sure about that, select a different one that feels better in that moment, so I don't think about it nearly as much. Irregularity and an intuition about randomness is saying if say you flip a coin a bunch of times, if you get like a ton of heads, people tend to perceive that as less likely, and some people are like, well, that's biased. But it is in this, if you're considering only this single trial where you flip some number of coins and then you're like, well, all outcomes are equally likely, right? Because each one is 50-50. But in reality, if you flip a coin like, a million times and you observe some random subset of that, it is indeed actually less likely that all of them were heads. And this is wrapped up in the concept of ecological rationality, which I can actually hover over to see here. And that's this idea here where an intuition is ecologically rational if you're actually observing more events than the ones in this particular small string of events. That is the window.opener property. Should help people recognize they're succeeding with the process of changing their habits, even if they haven't immediately succeeded in changing them. Extra spaces. Should be through all of these and not that much longer. Helpless story is when you say that there's no healthy way to deal with the situation, so you don't even try. A person habit prompt, useful when it's something extremely obvious that's not difficult to remember, like I need to eat. But that situation ends up being almost never. I think we could hone this in. So I'm marking this because I sort of gave a correct answer, but not exactly to the question that it's asking. It's also not completely not the question that it's asking, but the answer is completely different than what I put in, even though it's getting at the same underlying concept. If you can align what you're actually saying with what's on the answer, then you reinforce the information the same way every time, and you end up with stronger memories. So it's generally better to try to get those aligned as much as possible. He asked to pick another cluster. We'll go with the one that is not private here. Problem being solved. The solution here is to add outbuildings or add little outcroppings to buildings in order to transform any negative space that you find into one or more positive spaces. The problem being solved, which we actually just saw, but I've already forgotten exactly what it said. The problem here is that a lot of spaces in between buildings are kind of like non-places because their shapes are super vague, and those spaces barely ever get used because they don't feel like places where you would want to be. And that's an annoying bug, which we're going to fix with clusters here where the exact reverse of a card can be shown immediately after it. For now, I just hit skip to pass it on to another spot. So here we're being asked the difference between negative and positive space. So negative space is space that typically is just randomly left over. There was no attention given to its shape. It tends to be not a convex space, which there may be a card about that here in the future. Exact reverse. So we actually listed this already in the solution to positive outdoor spaces. You just add additional outcroppings or buildings. Positive space is one that's basically you can invert the figure ground relationship between the buildings and the outdoor space so that also feels like a real actual space. Psychological significance, that's where you feel like you actually want to be there. This is the convexity. Positive spaces are convex, meaning that you can draw a line between any 2 points within the space, and that line, the entirety of the line, will also lie within the figure. Oh, okay. I confused that with the convexity one. There are 2 ways that are listed here. I was kind of hoping that this easiest way would help, but it clearly did not, so we're going to need to come up with a more specific way to differentiate those 2. This is the convexity one. Convex space, I just actually explained the convex space to you, so we'll just go ahead and go here, and here's a description of it if that was confusing. This is convex, that one's non-convex. That's convex, this is the exact inverse. So city squares, this has to do with the same thing, that are used, have two properties of being partially enclosed, but then joined kind of onto the next square or space, so that there's a sense that you're not completely trapped. It still opens onto some place. And again, this is kind of another way of phrasing the same thing. People like some enclosure, but not too much. This is the car connection pattern. This is the secret place pattern. This is your own home is the name of this one. It's about children's and adults' realms, but I can't remember the name of the pattern. House for a small family. Okay. This is a house for one person. Closets in between rooms. Light on two sides of every room. House for a couple. This is the solution to that. Somehow this didn't get marked as a descriptor, so it's broken. Let's fix that. That should have asked for the pattern name, but instead it asked for the descriptor name there, which was useless. House for a small family solution here is to create a children's area, an adults area, and a common area, so that everybody kind of has their own space that's optimized for them when they need it. I have to take a momentary break here. I'll be back. All right, we are going to continue from here. He's the library cataloger at Oxford. This is Tennessee. That was difficult. Took me a very long time to come up with the answer. He is a poet, and he's a poet. So there's a complicated cluster here because he's also the chairman of Poets and Painters for Immediate Nuclear War. Peak Vonnegut. It was difficult because I had to kind of parse that and try to remember this part specifically. This is called Saroon. They thought it was good because beautiful people have their privacy destroyed by lovers. He wrote a piece in the New York Times saying that, his wife wrote a piece, Claire wrote a piece in the New York Times saying that Americans are constantly looking for love in places and forms it can't take. Okay. This could be made more precise. Hold on, my camera's crooked. There we go. Because what I said was true, but it isn't exactly what I was looking for. Indianapolis. His name is Isidore. She comes and evaluates the twins and determines that they need to be separated. I feel like my camera's still crooked. I don't care. It'll be all right. She says it's like asking Mozart to tune a piano. She's like the deep thinker. That's accurate. I just didn't express it in my own words quite as clearly as I could have. We could argue about I should have tried to express it in the same words every time, but I don't think that's so important in this particular case. Sometimes you want to be very precise and always say exactly the same words, but other times, as long as you've kind of picked up the correct impression, and the impression is very closely defined so that it's always the same every time. That is important. If you say I got the general impression, but exactly what you're coming up with is kind of different every time, that's kind of muddy and could definitely be improved in order to strengthen your memory here. The goal of this, because I didn't say, is just to remember works of fiction that I liked, remember more facts about them to kind of keep them closer to top of mind. So the specific words, unless I have a quote, are really not that important, because the benefits of being familiar with the fiction that I'm hoping to get are themselves pretty much entirely based on kind of understanding the emotional impact and perhaps the relationship of the story to things in one's life. And so that's kind of exactly the result that I'm hoping to get out of this. If I interpret it slightly differently, but still have the same idea every time, that's not necessarily a bad thing here. Because stories' interpretations are supposed to be flexible. His wife's name is... It's escaping me. I want to say Alice, but I'm pretty certain that's wrong. I don't know. Emily. Okay. That was an actual... I haven't forgotten very many cards during this session. I don't know why. Maybe I'm being, like, unusually concentrated and precise. The cunningness concept, Swampeter. It's the central of a central element of a karas, or like a group of people. That's a very bad explanation, but this is Claren Horlick Minton. This is not a exposition of Kurt Vonnegut, so I won't go into any more detail. This is Stelmaria. I've pronounced it wrong for years and years until I watched the TV series recently. It just says greetings after he travels across the entire universe to give this message to people. These should be curly quotes, so I can fix them. I am fussy about my microtypography, even on my flashcards. This is living in a beautiful mansion. They call it an asteroid. Okay, that's enough. I don't care about the exact words because I don't have them in quotes. I said hard because it didn't match the words, but that contradicted what I just said, that I didn't care about the words. So I'm going to say good. This is the solution. And again, this one got incorrectly not marked as a descriptor for some reason. There's some weird glitch that I'm working on finding there. For some reason that got marked as a property too. It's not a property. All right, I'm going to... We'll fix that. This is the house for a small family. I had trouble with that before, so I'm going to say good instead of easy, even though it felt kind of easy. This really quote goes the wrong way. This is to place windows on at least 2 sides of every room. There are also some things that you can do to slightly improve it if you can't do that, but that's what it's looking for. Okay, right. Of course, every room has to have at least 2 exterior walls to accomplish that. The way to accumulate patterns in a small house for one person is to layer them on top of each other. I said in a manner similar to the way words are used in poetry. This should return the result of composing the current results with the new item that it retrieved. This is loss in a large language model. The solution here is to make the edge less sharp by making it deep, maybe like 8 to 12 inches, and angled at a 50 to 60 degree angle from the wall, or from the window plane, which is, I guess, also the wall plane, just a little bit further in. The solution here is to create a spot where mostly the view, but also, for instance, the surface that you walk on, or the angle, or the general feeling of the space transitions abruptly, so that you can tell that you are entering a new place. The solution is to create a separate dressing room for each person or couple, ideally somewhere between the bathroom and the bedroom. One problem with this is that it has all of these items here, and it's not clear exactly which ones I need to do. This is one downside of using a very formalized solution descriptor. My solution to this, solution to the solution not being right, is if there are specific elements in here that I really need to remember, I will make separate cards about them. And for this one, I'm kind of going for a general, what's the answer to this pattern, and the details, like what it should contain, and also that it should come between the bedroom and the bathroom. I actually have separate cards added for those, so I'm not too concerned about the details in this case. It might be nice if somewhere in this left side I could provide a hint saying that those details weren't that important, but that feels kind of ugly, and also we don't really have a great way to implement that in RemNote right now when this is a template. You'd have to include it like in the name of the table column. So I don't know. I'm making a lot of these patterns cards. I'm going to have several thousand of them when I'm done, because there's about 270 patterns, I believe, in the book. And all of them have, at least 3 or 4 cards, some of them double-sided. So I'm not too worried that I'm going to forget the pattern here and what I want answered. If it was a smaller number of cards, I might need to be more worried about that. So that's why I'm marking that good, even though there were elements on there that I did not recall, in short. Low doorways are needed where a space needs a very strong sense of transition, like the privacy or intimacy level changes quickly, or at the entrance to a home. This is homes, or this is an example of getting more specific here. Needed in homes or in more public spaces, but ones that are meant to be sort of more intimate, or have a different vibe inside them than outside, like a church or a library or something like that. The problem here is that bedrooms are stupid. That's basically what they say in their pattern, because they mix functions indiscriminately. The space around a bed in a bedroom usually mostly goes to waste or doesn't function well. And other things that people do in bedrooms, like storage and dressing, could be better served by purpose-built spaces of different shapes, which are right next to it. Interior windows space needed in, especially like hallways or really small rooms, which otherwise feel dead when there's no space. The problem solved by an entrance transition is that when you enter a building that's supposed to feel very different, where you're supposed to behave differently, sometimes there's not enough of a sense of transition, and so you kind of feel like you've just you're still outside when you go in. They claim that rooms that have this feel pleasant, and rooms that do not, and that's pretty much the only discriminator that you need to figure that out. His wife, we just determined, was Emily. Brought that back after I had forgotten it. Effect on the lot design of a half-hidden garden. It means that the traditional kind of, especially urban pattern where lots are narrow facing the street and go a long ways back really doesn't work very well. You need more street frontage in order to be able to have this half-hidden side garden in every space. Same quotes. Wish I could both answer it and edit at the same time. We're thinking about changing that. Location of dressing rooms. I had mentioned earlier that ideally it's between the bedroom and the bathroom used by that person. You make it significantly lower than a normal doorway so that it's obvious that it's low. If you just lower it a little bit, then very tall people are likely to not notice that it's different and hit their head. So you can make the room, easiest way is to make the room just shallow and put 2 windows right next to each other out in the front with a little bit of space between them. This will help to reduce the glare, and the darkness gradient is not so noticeable if it's not very deep. Meaning it's much brighter next to the window than further in. If you have to make the room deep, though, then you have the other option of make the walls very white or light, and have like clear story windows or very large ones, so that you get in a lot of light. And third, place them in very deep reveals using that deep reveal pattern that we saw earlier, such that the glare next to the window is reduced. And if I expand this, we can see also that's exactly what's supposed to happen there. You know what? I'm going to edit this because we have the pattern in here, and so we should be using a link to that reference. I've just been kind of adding these. I've been, rather than going through the book in order, because the book's not really meant to work like that. It's a very intertwinkled pattern that you would not want to do in a hierarchy or in order if you were doing it in a pure digital space where the topology could work any way. I've just kind of been flipping through and finding things that look interesting, and then sometimes following the links to other areas. So I've just been adding them in whatever order I feel like. That means that some of the references aren't always there because they didn't exist at the time, and I didn't feel like creating red links or creating new elements that weren't populated at the time. And so at some point I'll have to go back and add all of those in. The example that they give here is if you have a large group of people and a couple people want to go talk quietly about something by themselves, but they don't want to leave the group, they can move into an alcove space where they're still present with everyone else, but they have a little bit of privacy for that conversation. The explanation here is that when you go into a building without a transition, you don't feel like your role has changed. You feel like you're still out in public and have to follow public behavior, whereas you actually do not anymore. Parking spot should be a positive space. Should add a reference to this one too. Positive outdoor space. Actually, it should be the lowercase positive outdoor space. I have an uppercase one, which is the name of the pattern, and a lowercase one, which is the concept. I should probably clean that up. You can see that this one is where it's actually defining what a positive outdoor space is. This is lowercase positive outdoor space, speak of the devil. That's negative outdoor space. Any 2 points within, this is convexity, which we talked about earlier. By the way, this bug is being fixed in the next version. I just haven't installed it yet. My solution to Newcomb's problem, I have a post on this about this on my microblog. My solution is that if you've never heard of the game before, you should two-box or be greedy. But if you have heard of the problem, you need to change your psychological alignment so that you're the person who one-boxes, because the kind of person who one-boxes, because that's the only winning move. If you decide you're the type of person who two-boxes, you can't win the problem. This is the number of the quantity of training data in the model. Significantly more training data. Remaining in dialogue. I believe it goes down to ES3 with a process. We edited that one before, I think. I remember seeing it earlier in the session. The one thing that kind of bugs me about when you edited it going away is that then I think you tend to say it's easier than it actually was because you just saw it. So I'm actually going to drop my rating down to good there. Like I said, hopefully we'll have that changed at some point in the future so that that rating bias doesn't happen. Anything like that is always a detail with spaced repetition. I think worrying too much about your ratings is a big mistake. There are many things that are more important. But of course, if you systematically say easy when you should be saying hard and vice versa, you're going to have a worse time with spaced repetition for sure. Probably good rule says that you can select any item when you have a search problem, select any item that looks like it's probably good and investigate to see if it's actually good. But this is the wrong approach in a heavy-tailed distribution where the outliers are the only important things. Because in that case, when you see something that's probably good, it's probably not an outlier because it just seems good and not amazing. And so it is much better to keep looking at that point. By the way, I should just say that I'm explaining in a lot more detail than I would to myself, just so that you can kind of understand my thought process here. Here in my brain, like heavy-tailed distribution is already a fixed concept. I don't need to explain that and explain about how it applies to outliers. Actually, if I were saying this to myself, I would just say heavy-tailed distribution. Like that's really all I would need. I'd be flipping through these much faster. My average time on a card is probably like 5 seconds. Oftentimes it's like 1 or 2 if it's something this easy, and then there's some that are more difficult and I have to sit and think about, so that average comes more up to like 5 or 6. I think it may actually be like 7 point something, come to think of it. One reason for that is that sometimes I sit here doing stuff like this, take a break for a while, and then it ups to 20 seconds before it cuts off that statistic. But also some cards, just take significantly longer, especially like those multi-line ones. Try to generally avoid multi-line cards when I can, because they are slow and harder to remember, but sometimes, you know, a small set of a couple items is what you want to learn, and it makes sense in that case. This is st.characters. It was like having a brain transplant. I loved this so much that I put it in here. This is a shoe fly. We saw the reverse of it earlier today. 8 eggs. We saw this one earlier, but there was this space missing, and I remember it being slightly difficult to remember, so I'm going to say partially recalled. Again, shouldn't have to remember what I rated it before. Hopefully that gets fixed or changed. It's not really a bug, it's just a design flaw. Downs-Thompson paradox says that the equilibrium speed of traffic and public transit tend to match in an area as long as there's a dedicated right-of-way so that the public transit doesn't get slowed down by other traffic. The implication here, the corollary, is that if there is no dedicated right-of-way, all traffic can slow down indefinitely, because if it's the same speed to take the bus or to drive and you need to get there, you can't essentially improve the traffic by not driving and taking the more efficient route. So they're just all going to continue to slow down as much as people will tolerate for demand. This is /notify, stack notify. We're not even using this. So here's an important thing to think about. If Flashcard doesn't seem useful, this is a product that we're basically not using right now. Just disable it. In fact, sometimes it's even helpful to come to view or disable ancestors, which will show you all the items above it. And in fact, I really want to disable this one. I wish that it had an option here, but it's going to be pretty easy to do that. I just have to say go to rem, come up here, and I'm going to change this priority of this entire document to paused. I don't care about those 34 cards in there because, again, we're not using this. I also actually know quite a few of them. I made this document primarily for other people back when we were using it. All right, this is... it's about the positive outdoor spaces. It's the name of the pattern. The twofold solution to this problem. Every person needs their own explicitly private space, maybe like a large alcove. And the house also needs to be embedded in a social structure, going beyond architecture, but it may take physical form, where there are neighbors who are also good companions for each person, so that if people want to be with other people, but separate from each other in the couple, they can go do that easily. I think that's easy. This specifies what characters can make up the text. Go talk to a friend, or I guess probably, or be with yourself, but it's probably, that's what it says, because it's specifically about socializing. We saw this a little bit earlier, but I had to edit it to add a reference just to review. Make the walls very white, use very deep reveals, and add extra high windows. It says make the ceiling. Yeah, I mean, the ceiling very high was implied by high windows, but perhaps I could have done a better job of explaining that, so I'm going to actually give it a hard. There's an argument to be made that making it hard, that I shouldn't just say make it hard, I should try to improve this in some way. I'm going to give it a couple more reviews to see if it gets better as I become more familiar with this card. But there is also the argument that as the interval grows, it's harder to remain familiar with that card, and so maybe this is never going to get better. I'm going to cheerfully admit that by pressing hard here, rather than trying to improve the card in some way, I'm being a little bit lazy, but sometimes being lazy works out. So I'm going to try to be lazy once, and if I'm still having problems after that, I will need to come in and change the card in some way. Parking spot should be a positive outdoor space. Children are welcome in the couples realm area, but it's very clear that they are out of their appropriate space. All the adults' rules apply and there are guests in it. This is called the, it's related to Taleb's theory of teaching birds how to fly, but it's not that. There's a reference to it right under as a child of this rem. It is the rocks do calculus fallacy, which I think I actually named myself. So rocks do, it's claiming that right, a theory is used by something, in this case an inanimate object, a rock, This is a Slashdot comment that I read once. They do calculus when they roll down hills because they always make sure that they travel a distance exactly equal to the integral of their speed over time. Integral over time of their velocity. Oral rehydration solution. Contents are greetings. It may be stuck because we've come to the end of the priority row. I think it's stuck because we've come to the end of the priority row. I'm going to report that as a bug. That's actually fine anyway, because I think we've gone through enough for now, and these are the active set and the most interesting ones. We don't need to proceed through the maintaining and no priority ones at this time. Let's go through the edit later ones, because this it's good to always do them at the end of the review session while it's still fresh in your mind, and I think this is also educational here. So this was the one where I confused the figure ground relationship with the convexity one. So sometimes you need to see the context, and there's a very easy way to do that by simply expanding the portal up another layer. In fact, I did that one too many times, and now I lost track of where it was. Hold on, here we go. What it did was it grouped all the ones in the patterns here that are together. What I actually wanted to click on was the positive outdoor space, so that then we can add the other items in the positive outdoor space area. We might also be able to fix this. I'm just going to clarify this by saying pattern, and then I'm going to alias it to positive outdoor space, so that when I choose to link to it as a pattern, and in fact, I notice, when I choose to link to it as a pattern, if I want to give it the full name, without the pattern clarification, because it's clear from context that it's a pattern, I can trivially do that. By doing this, I noticed that I actually linked the wrong concept here. The one that I wanted to link was this lowercase positive outdoor space, so I will correct that. Now, the item that I wanted to edit here was, can the figure ground relationship be reversed? So let's say we need to contrast it with the mathematical way here, in a way better than easiest. Let's say psychological. I think that's a reasonable description of the figure ground relationship. We'll have to see if that works. We'll hop back up here. Light on two sides of every room. Asks specifically about facial expressions. Okay, so here's a thing where I said, this is an extensive problem being solved, like I was talking about. I want to make sure that this specific detail goes on another card. So again, I'm going to expand this guy. We're going to add all the hidden rems here. And we're going to, where did it go? Okay, we're going to say social effect of glare caused by single-sided windows. We'll do to interpret each other's facial expressions. That's right. I hate that point of grammar. Okay, that one's done. This is a bug that I need to report. We'll ignore that one for a minute here because that's not very useful. I said when it's something extremely obvious. Okay, yes. So we need to expand up to the other types of prompts here. Add at least the context and action. I don't care about the model. I want to see what these other ones are under here so I can figure out how best to contrast them, what I'm asking about here. When to use, whenever possible. When to use for one-time actions. When to use is kind of a vague descriptor here. It does make sense in the context of the notes, but when I saw it alone, it wasn't quite right. There's always this tension between using the same material as notes and individual flashcards, where the exact most concise and clearest way will be different for each. What I said, I'm glad I wrote this edit later message, when it's something extremely obvious. I'm going to change this one to say how often to use, and I'm going to say conditions under which to use when it matches a when your desired here is and difficult to forget. I think there's somewhere else where I had explained this. Probably in a different section of here, and I'm not going to take the time to go look for it right now. What I will do here is add an example. And we're going to say the example is trying to at a different time. You'll be hungry anyway. I'm going to make this extra card detail because it kind of clarifies that so that we'll see it on the back side of the card there. But I made that a disabled flashcard because I don't think I need to practice that. I could change these. I'm going to just to make them consistent. So instead of when to use, we'll say conditions under which to use. I'm going to fix this spacing here while I'm looking at it. And one more thing, because we significantly changed this prompt, I'm going to reset its schedule so that it shows up as a new card. I probably wouldn't have to do this, but anytime that I feel like exactly what the card is testing has changed, I think it's very cheap to learn the card from the beginning again. If it's too easy, you'll just press easy on it a couple times and it will very quickly rise high into the exponential spacing stratosphere. So at most you're costing yourself like 30 seconds. If it turns out that you didn't need to reset the schedule, whereas if you did need to reset the schedule and you didn't, then there may be months when you don't actually know that card when you would have liked to. So you don't want to indiscriminately reset the schedule of like dozens of cards at once, but when it's a single card, I've already spent more time talking about this than I could possibly lose under the worst conditions by not resetting it. So we are going to reset practice history for this single rem. Here's this one. I hate this card. Let's try to figure out why I hate this card and what we could do about it. Just trying to figure out which things to add to make this context clear without adding way too much context. So there are two principles. My conclusion from looking at this is that this is not actually a very useful card, so I'm simply going to disable it. I think that's always a good default. If it doesn't seem like the card says something that's extremely relevant to you and that you really need to know, you don't like the card and you're not sure how to fix it, there's not anything obviously wrong with it. It's probably not worth trying to improve it. What I would have to do here is probably go back to the book and figure out, what was in this section, or at least expand the entire outline and go through it. And what thing that I wanted to know that was not captured here, do I need to find a different way to access with spaced repetition flashcards? But I feel like I basically understand this from other cards around it anyway, so I'm simply going to disable it, but it will be there in my notes should I need it again. There are a couple in here that we didn't talk about, and I'm just going to leave those briefly here. So hold on, this was one. I said this was too long. Okay, this is going to be interesting. I don't want to do this one, but I don't think this is a good flashcard at all. My concern here is that I don't think asking what are the similarities of the wedge and Cathedral Hill is really something that I need to do. It might be something that would be kind of nice to try to explain to somebody, but I talk about this somewhere on my blog. I think when you say, yeah, it would be nice to be able to say that, it's much better to just develop an understanding of the concept such that you can figure that out on the fly rather than try to like memorize those items. It's almost like you're not actually developing the understanding that being able to list everything demonstrates. You're just having the ability to list everything while not really understanding it. And I'm also debating whether this is actually valuable knowledge to have in the first place. So again, what I'm going to do is just disable it. I don't know, that might be kind of disappointing if you're trying to, if you're hoping to see me refactor this in some way. one thing that I might try to do would be add close deletions here, which just kind of gives you a general idea of what these things are. Or I might say, for instance, similarity, what's a similarity? And maybe I'll do this just for demonstration purposes. So I could say, the Wedge and Cathedral Hill are similar in their location, in that they're right next to downtown, separated by a freeway. So that's a good one, right? We could also add distribution of residence options. And don't know why I can't use delete there. I can only use backspace forward. So, I could have a couple of these. I could maybe make them descriptors. If similarities is a concept, it's kind of up to you. These basically feel like descriptors, so I'm going to make them into descriptors. Just in terms of how I had written the front. It is a little odd to have descriptors that aren't under something that's obviously a concept, but I don't really care that much. These were not here. Oh, this was an interesting one too. So in order to get this context, I need to have both Horlick and Claire showing here so that I can see those. Oops, that's the wrong one. I need to expand this, and there we go. I probably want all of these also. All right, so now I can see just these two characters. I needed both of them because what happened was I gave an answer that was what specifically Claire did to cause a problem. And oddly, I haven't actually written anything. Oh, it's right here. This is honestly a really odd place to have it. I think it should be down here. I'm going to tweak this. Not sure why that is not working. That was weird. I think there was some funky meta character in there. Okay, so I need to make this descriptor key more specific here. It's the word canceled is causing the problem here. Because the natural response to that is why one was canceled, which why canceled is in fact there. It's like the natural response to why canceled is like, what politically incorrect thing did you do that made people not like you? Accusation about character. Being communist is part of your character in the McCarthy era, I think, leading to cancellation. I think that'll work. And lastly, the Bieder-Meinhof phenomenon here. Let's also expand this. That's all we have about it, though. Story leading to name. I'm debating adding a descriptor that's giving the way that I interpreted it, which is, who's the name named after this German terrorist group. But I think I already know that and don't need Flashcard on it. So I'm just going to click it. And that is it for today.